It's time to be woke. Take off your shades. It helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Hello, welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is hump day, and that is not a reference to sex. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in this morning. We are going to be talking about a very current and relevant topic, policy position that was kind of thrust into the spotlight by everybody's favorite I can't summarize this person in one adjective, so I'm just going to say AOC by her what a lot of people on the left are categorizing as performative display of a policy position. And so Kerri and I decided, we said, well, let's talk about this, but let's talk about it from a number of different angles, certainly from what she thinks she was trying to accomplish or what we think she was trying to accomplish, or whether or not it had anything to do with either one of those two things. And what the fuck is Nina Turner going to TYT for? But sorry, that was supposed to be my inside voice. Anyway, let's begin the show with the introduction of my lovely, talented co-host, everybody's favorite, queen of low bandwidth, Ms. Kerri Barber. Good morning, Kerri.
Good morning, Andy. Okay, you have me cracking up completely. Just so everybody knows, we have been toying with this whole idea, this show concept of Eat the Rich with recipes for a very long time, and it's finally time. It's here. It's time to swap those recipes and share your favorites for the long pork. Yeah, we're gonna get into it. Okay, so first, when we talk about AOC, Andy and I behind the scenes have argued for 2 years? Two and a half years.
No, you know what? My side of the story has consistently and pretty much logarithmically declined as kind of like the shifting Overton window in society that we see now. So I will, I will admit I am still the only or the most optimistic person that I know. I think some people see that as a flaw. I seem to see it as something that's good. But even my position cannot be held from what we've seen, despite everything. So yeah, so I'm not going to say that this between the two of us is an argument, a division per se. You, I know, have stayed steadfastly in your position on the squad, and kudos to you. That's fine. And I think that your position is based more on your more sophisticated understanding of electoral politics in the United States than this Canadian who really didn't even understand what a purple state was a year ago, right? So there's that. So I'm not going to argue with you about this anymore. We can only critique what we can see, right? So, and if there is a silver lining anywhere in this story, it's hidden, right? So you can't really critique that or enhance that. And so basically, I think I'm just kind of going to go with the flow and let you lead on this. So
well,
there.
true. Yeah, and this I think goes to my age, and as some of the people I work with, I have known about, like, I don't know AOC as a person, obviously, but in my line of work, I'm very cynical, so it's always follow the money. So when I'm looking at AOC and where she came up through Justice Democrats, and oh, by the way, Justice Democrats misappropriated $1.2 million of donor money that's in their FEC reports. That's my first, like, something's not right here. And then just the way the Justice Democrats came out of the gate, where they talked a good game and said, you know, we're going to support all of these candidates who want to run, and then didn't. They had like two that they supported, AOC being one of them, because she came up with them. And then when she got elected, she took five Justice Democrat administrators with her to Congress, and one of them had to leave quietly and quickly for the same reason that I mentioned just a moment ago. So this is the problem with being older in politics and knowing where the bodies are buried. I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming because you know what this person is. And as I mentioned to RJ before in our Fred Hampton chat, I owe him a story, two stories about Nina Turner that I purposely withheld until her election was over. But yeah, now I'm ready to tell those stories. So this is why a lot of people in politics do not like me, because I'm there. I'm there when they do some shitty stuff. And I'm like, nah, and this is part of the problem with electoral politics. And I'm not going to point at AOC or anyone else. I'm going to point at us, because it goes back to us with the celebrity and reality show TV. This is who we elect, right? We have the sacred golden calf, like AOC, you cannot criticize, even though that's part of the job. That's absolutely part of the job. So just real quick, everyone's joining up right this morning. And I just want to say thank you. Hey, Jean, thank you. She said, I thought I'd be working in the field, but too much rain. So she's joining us. Thank you, Jean. And Bride's Biscuit. That's a good one. I love that moniker. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And Malik Clary is here this morning. So let's see. And someone else has characters for their moniker, so I can't even read.
I think that's the artist formerly known as Prince.
Okay. And they said, I just deleted a lot of subscriptions this week. I will not be offering any support to anyone that's carrying water for frauds. Your channel survived the subscription first. Woot! We're so happy. And you're joining us first thing this morning. So hopefully you will weigh in and, you know, what do you consider frauds? So let's talk about that one. But you know, when it comes to AOC and her dress and the Met Gala, I think the biggest tragedy no one's talking about, which makes me laugh because I'm full of snark, is AOC's dress completely showed up Kamala Harris's stepdaughter, who Devin and I were arguing about this. She showed up in like this unitard velvety red thing, and I hated it because it was so gaudy. But Devin loved it because it was gaudy. So I feel bad. You know, she spent hours putting herself together, and nobody was talking about it at all. So I feel like that was the tragedy.
Kerri, there's one thing that I wanted to mention, and Narissa was upset that we didn't see her first tweet. So I just wanted to go back, and her comment was ChickfilA Sea Dress.
Oh, very clever.
Very clever. See?
Appreciate it.
We got you. I got you back, Narissa. Got you back.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. So, Andy, this was late. I was really late getting this graphic to you. Do you happen to have the one I sent you about the tweets?
Well, it's funny. It's funny you should mention that, Kerri, because I was able to download it and get it ready in time.
So this one I think epitomizes the entire thing, right? The entire thing. So so shout out to Britney, who was writing on behalf of the neolibs this morning and really personally offended on behalf of AOC, who she tried it. I'm going to give Britney the credit. She tried it. She says here, criticizing AOC's fabulous dress is also performative and doing nothing to immediately improve the material conditions of the poor, actually. I love it because you can hear the snark when she wrote it. And so this is the entire argument about you. Thou shalt not criticize the golden calf. You cannot. And,
I love that the position is always, well, what are you doing? Right? Without doing any looking into the fact that we have a show, it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Hashtag tour, right? Hashtag tour for the poor. Hello.
Yeah.
So then Medicare for All, the Bay Area bias response, and I was like, this is beautiful. The response is, you are correct. I have a better use of my position, power, and influence as a representative in U.S. Congress. I should be ashamed of myself. And I was like, wow, it's beautiful. I love it because that is the point. That is the point. AOC is not an activist. She is no longer an activist. She is a member of Congress with power and authority. And oh, by the way, there are zero bills in Congress right now to raise the tax on the 1% or, even 0.5% of the top earners. No bills whatsoever. And oh, by the way, since introduced on March 9th, HR 1976, also known as Medicare for All, still has 0 committee hearings scheduled. And just so you know how Congress works, staff members and those people who are managing the committees, not Congress people, the people who actually run shit in Congress, it takes them all of 3 minutes to schedule a hearing. HR 1976 has to go through not 1, not 2, but 7 committees before it can even reach the House for a floor vote unless a member of Congress pushes it. No one has done so. No hearings have been scheduled. It's just sitting there collecting dust while we're having discussions about somebody who wrote something on the back of a dress. Right? Isn't that her job? Her job is not to be a celebrity. Her job is not to be an activist. Having, as much as I like to see people trying to get the word out and advertise for all the shit that we're going through, having a sleepover on the steps of Congress after you allowed the eviction moratorium to pass is not helpful. Writing on the back of a dress, like, wasn't there someone else in the White House who wore clothing with messages on the back? Wasn't there? Exactly.
Let me think. Wasn't it a porn star? Can't remember.
No. Oh, hey, we got a wow, $10 tip. Thank you so much. And the comment is super chat says, if it took the dress for people to see that AOC is a fraud, good. But it should have been obvious a year ago. AOC is playing the role of activist while she holds actual power. Was she ever real? And this is, when we opened the show, Andy and I had differing opinions about that. My answer from the get-go was no. And Andy was, he was like most people, trying to, give her the benefit of the doubt, having the hope and all of that. So, yeah, we differed quite a bit on that particular thing. And I've always said that, and I have no plans to run for office again, but I have always said that if you're going to run as a progressive, and progressive to me does not mean left, right, or whatever, it means for the people, it's a populist position, then what I would do is run with the desire to serve one term and bring somebody with me. This would be my second someone that I could support to run for their term. And we just do it like that. It's kind of like siege warfare. Get one person over the wall and you know that they're not going to survive. So you bring the next person right behind you, train them up, make sure everybody sees who they are and they're just like you. So it's never meant to be an evergreen job, but I would go in there and literally raise some hell. They would be so sick of me standing on the floor, calling them out, and I would literally go to West Virginia, to New York, and say, why isn't your representative doing X, Y, and Z? Here's what I did. Here's what I did today. And here's what they told me. They shut me down. Mama Bear, Andy, come on now. Can you even imagine a scenario where Nancy Pelosi would try to get me in a close our office and dress me down? I think but what we need, and that's not what we got the pushback on the force to vote, right? When bitch about Joe Manchin, who is doing exactly what you're supposed to do, got pushback on force to vote. So yeah.
Quick
Right.
little side note to the
Oh.
whole dress story. Apparently, the dress was designed by a Canadian designer. If you saw that picture on AOC's Twitter feed, apparently it was to promote her dresses, but I think that really it was just this designer just wanted to get a picture of herself grabbing AOC's ass.
Well, you know what? From a marketing perspective, it was a brilliant move because we're all talking about this designer now, right? And isn't that what they hope when they go on the red carpet, whether it's the Met Gala or anything else? The designer's hoping that everybody talks about the dress. So kudos to that designer for a brilliant marketing move. But human love solidarity. I love you, and you always take the high road, and I really admire that. But this comment I totally disagree with. It says AOC's intent was not to solve problems, just to communicate to the power brokers. And I think that's a wonderful segue into this particular topic. So for those of you who didn't know Andy and I and our program a year ago, we had the distinct privilege to interview a gentleman by the name of Morris Peal. Morris Peal is the current president of a group called Patriotic Millionaires. And if you don't know who this group is, I put some links in the chat so you can check it out. And they actually have the URL taxtherich.com. I put that link in the chat. So they have been saying this for years, even under the Obama administration, right? So when Bush, Obama, Trump, all of this, they have been around for a very long time saying, hey, I cannot donate to build a bridge or a road and our infrastructure is crumbling. Please tax me so that I can feel like I'm part of the giving back society in all of this, particularly at a state level. Like most states, I know when I lived in Illinois, there were 70,000 bridges who had a D rating or lower. Right. And that's when you're trying to commute to work. You don't want a bridge to fall apart. But if you were a millionaire living in Illinois, and there are many, you had no way to contribute to the state funding to build a bridge. You could donate to the arts, but that's pretty much it. And so that's where this group came around. So I did include a link to the full interview we did with Morris Peal, who was a lovely gentleman, lives out of Manhattan, and he's been really big on this, as well as there are a number of millionaires that maybe, I wanted to say maybe we eat them last, but you got to give them credit. They've been out here begging, part of the donor class. They are the donor class, and they're trying to get that message out. So I would argue that they have the inside scoop and the inside access that AOC's dress didn't. AOC's dress, I believe, was for us, right? Because you can see based on the commentary and the smirks and everything else, it was just like the Occupy Wall Street, where the brokers are up on the balcony sipping champagne, laughing at the marchers below. I think they were doing some of the same things at that particular gala, whereas the Patriotic Millionaires are having serious conversations, but unfortunately getting nowhere. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
but the my whole, if you'll indulge me for a second, Kerri, I posted on Twitter yesterday. I tweeted out a tweet that basically said that I know that AOC is aware of MMT, right, which is modern monetary theory, and without getting into it greatly for the benefit of the story, the MMT is the narrative where the federal government is the issuer of the currency. They can spend as much as they want. They're only constricted by the natural resources, goods, and services in society, not by the ability to spend, because they can spend as much as they want because they issue the currency. Okay, that's what MMT is. And I know that AOC knows MMT. I was there when Savage Joy interviewed AOC before she ran for Congress and talked about modern monetary theory. For the longest time, and I'm not sure if they're still friends, but for the longest time, AOC and Anders Banal, who is an all-in MMT dude, okay? Don't know him that well. We did a Macro and Cheese podcast with him and had a couple of brief conversations with him, but I've never met the guy. But I know that he is as much MMT as any of the economists that we've or academics that we've talked to in terms of MMT. So he knows it. She knows it inside and out. So the problem that I have with this dress is, okay, if you're going to say tax the rich, there's an implication that when you say that, you need the rich people's tax money to fund progressive policies. On the federal level, that is simply untrue. And she knows that. And I'm not suggesting that anybody here, that whether you believe MMT or you don't believe MMT or whatever, okay, that's not the point. The point is that AOC knows it. Okay. And if she's implying that we need to tax the rich to fund things, that's a completely bold-faced lie. So even if you're going to do a performative dress at the Met Gala, okay, the weakest message you can send as a progressive is tax the rich if you understand MMT, right? Medicare for all, eliminate student debt, right? Fight climate change. They're certainly better messages to send out there on our side of the fence instead of just tax the rich. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't tax the rich. Obviously, we need to tax the shit out of the rich because there shouldn't be that many billionaires in the world. Tax the B right off them, okay? But just because they have too much money, not because we need it, right? So that was one of the points I just wanted to make, that this tax the rich dress was, if you understand AOC's knowledge of MMT, is the weakest possible message she could have sent. And I just wanted to mention that point, Kerri. Kerri?
I was muted, but I want to get to this comment. And okay, guys, focus. It's not about the dress. Okay, so here's one comment from 3LD. Are you talking about this dress? Are you talking, one of the people talking about it? So she did draw attention to the concept. So what's the problem? You are petty. Focus. You're new here, and we work on cognitive ability and making sure that you think this through. And I need you to come to the next step, because while you were writing your snarky little comment, you missed what Andy said. So let's step back a little bit, and this is where I'm going to show my age. When I was a child, as 7, it was 7 or 9. I remember my grandfather sitting me down and talking about how the wealthy were taxed at 75% of their net income and how that was awful. And as a child, I didn't understand why my grandfather, who was not a millionaire, not even part of the wealthy middle class, cared. And the reason was because he was told to care. Just like you 3LD are told to care about this dress. When what we're actually talking about is what happens when you tax wealthy individuals. It guides behavior. So what was happening back in the early 80s? Because they were taxed at such a high rate, they were forced to reinvest that money in their businesses, particularly in research and development in their companies. Rather than hoarding all that wealth privately in their private accounts, they were reinvesting in it and making the investments in R&D so that we didn't have to at a public level, okay? So they are using socialism today, socialism with our dollars, the public funds, to do that research and development while also maintaining their profits for their own hoard. Whereas before, when they were taxed at a higher rate, it motivated their behavior to do that on their own, to bootstrap on their own, and it helped all of us because we were not funding their private enterprise the way we do today. And that is the point. So 3LD, if you were not paying attention to what Andy was saying, I hope that this makes it a little clearer for you. And maybe, Andy, you can clean up what I said and say it a little nicer, because this is why the dress was performative. The dress was meant for us, to placate us. And when I talked about, just on that graphic, that there is zero legislation in Congress right now to raise that tax rate. Zero. It's all performative, which means that we in the public funds are still funding all of this. And if you will go back and listen to the interview we did with Morris Pearl, he says the same thing. The same thing. Please allow me to be a productive member of society by taxing me in a way that helps you at a state level. And Andy just made the comment. We know that AOC has a strong background in economics. She has a strong mastery of MMT, and she has thrown all of that away because she believes that you don't know it, and you will fall for it every time. And that is the point of this conversation. It's about economics and guiding behavior through taxes. Everybody on the same page now.
Right. And I, you know what, I understand that people are passionate about this from a number of different angles, and that's fine. I just wanted to make the point that I know that AOC does know MMT, right? And the reason that's important, and I know it's not an easy concept to understand, because people have been propagandized their entire lives to believe that the federal government is constrained by a budget, and we're going to be we're kicking the can down the curb, and we're destroying the future for our children and grandchildren. Well, that's simply just not the case, right? Because those statements started coming out when the federal debt was in the in this low billions, right? And the debt continues to go up, and there's never been any downside to deficit spending, right? Anywhere in the world, if you understand MMT and you have you have at least a rudimentary understanding of macroeconomics, right? So I'm not trying to chide people for understanding what that means or why the dress means. I basically was just making a point about it, right? We can only critique AOC for what we see her doing, right? She refuses to tell us what she is doing behind the scenes, if anything, right? So you can only critique what you see with your own eyes. And that's, I think, my point, right? I can only process the information I have. And I think that that's true with anybody on the left. At this point, the entire process of thinking that politicians are the ones that are going to save us from this is not the case and has never been the case, right? Any systemic change that has ever happened in society has always come from the ground level, from the activist level, right? The civil rights movement. Everything that's ever changed for the betterment of society has come from us on the ground, and the politicians change the laws to reflect that change, right? And to expect that AOC and the squad are going to be responsible for that change, is pretty facetious, right? It's just my opinion anyways, but continue, Kerri.
Actually, no, I want to get to a comment that Nick Carducci just posted, which, Andy, you're going to want to tackle this one. It says deficit spending actually makes bonds rich and poor equal poverty and equality. So if I understand what you're saying, so Nick, again, I'm going to show my age here. Growing up in the 80s, when we had the reversal on federal spending and investments into the country, it hurt small businesses. And what that does on a global scale here, particularly in the United States, when you are not investing in your country, either through infrastructure and all of these things, and you're actually tightening up that belt, you are hurting small businesses, which are 98% of all companies in the US. That actually exacerbated the offshoring, that made sure that a lot of our small mom and pop shops went out of business. So we are the economic engine when you talk about small businesses. And if you're not investing at a federal level into those, like COVID, let's take an example here, right? We gave a lot of money to the banks. First off, that was the first thing that was done back in February and March. But they didn't do anything for small businesses like mom and pop shops, restaurants, all of that sort of thing, as was done in the rest of the world. So what happened? You have now the business owner fighting the wage earner, and we're all risking our lives, and a lot of businesses are going out because of that. So let's be cautious here when we talk about deficit spending. If I understand your comment correctly, we're saying no prohibition on deficit spending. All bets are off right now during COVID. So either we're going to have a robust economy or we're not. And then I would also, not to get too far off of it, but if you're not paying attention to what's happening to U.S. ports right now, where we have multiple, I think at one point the Los Angeles port had 400 massive cargo ships just waiting because they could not bring goods in. This is what happens when we got rid of manufacturing and offshored everything. We cannot bounce back as a nation with our GDP as quickly as, let's say, Germany or someplace else that does have manufacturing. And all of that came about, what was it, the great sucking sound, where all jobs were moved, manufacturing was moved. And that was a result of, under the Clinton era, tightening up the bootstraps and the belts so that we're not investing at a local level. So kind of a convoluted response there, but yeah, come on, let's talk about federal economics, because isn't that what the point of the dress was supposed to be, right? So Andy, why would we tax millionaires? It's not because we need their taxes to fund bridges and roads. That's not how that works.
No, of course not. So, the reason we tax billionaires is because when a billionaire has so much money that they couldn't even imagine how to spend it all, right? They buy political favor, right? We see that over and over, right? The perfect example on the right is the Koch brothers, right? They're very libertarian oriented. Their policies believe in small government and deregulation and all of these things, right? And when I talk about MMT, or we talk generally about MMT, right, we see signs. we know, and if you have a macroeconomic understanding, even to a small degree, the pandemic should have shown you that it is possible for the federal government to spend at will, right? To make people whole. And, we've talked about this a number of times, how they had authorized the Fed to make $1 trillion a day available to the market, for a period of 30 days to keep the market liquid, right? Where did that money come from? Did anybody's taxes go up? Right? That's the CARES Act, as bad as it ended up, those acts ended up being, at least they did on a few levels help people to stay at home during the worst of the pandemic, whether you understand whichever side of the fence you're on about the pandemic, but those things happened. Did anybody's tax go up? No, right? So we understand this. We see this. So 2008, the federal government bailed out the banks to the tune of how much money, right? The federal government in both Canada and the United States bailed out the auto industry, right? The American versions of GM and Chrysler both declared bankruptcy. They were both bailed out. Did anybody's tax go up? Right? The only time we talk about pay go is when we have progressive policies that can actually help people and cost the donor class money. And that's why you don't see that.
Absolutely. And Cheese Sandwich, thank you for joining us. Cheese Sandwich, I think you totally get it. Cheese Sandwich says they use their money to control the government. Then they use the government to get more money. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that kind of ties in with something that Mr. Methuselah says. Love that. Mr. Methuselah says the entrance fee for the gala was $30,000. The table cost $275,000. Total cost is $305,000. So as I understand it, a lot of this was donated in particular to AOC, but this was the fundraiser for the Met Gala. And what did Devin say it was? It was for the costume department at the Met. Not the whole museum, but just one segment of it. So this is their annual fundraiser, and they turned it into this big to-do. So yeah, it's interesting because when I was looking at the ticket price, the cost of entry, $30,000, and we had done that entire segment with Veterans Off Grid, that would have paid for easily 5, if not 6 houses, educated 10 veterans, and helped with their sustainable farming initiative to generate their own revenue. So it's just, we're on a totally different level. And I love this tweet from Devin. Devin, who's 20, and I were talking about it. And he's like, yeah, they live in the clouds. And we live here on the ground, on the earth. And he just looked thoughtful and he said, I'd rather be here than where they are. Because he was just speaking to how detached they are from absolutely everything. And I think, speaking to Devin about it and listening to his points of view, it gave me a little bit of hope because his generation sees it for what it is. None of this is of any surprise. And I remember seeing a headline yesterday where they did a study on the psychology of people in his age group and a little bit older, and they are all suffering trauma right now because of the lack of effort on global governments to address climate change significantly, right? And isn't this all part and parcel of what we're talking about? This divide, this inequality, where if you can afford a ticket to go to the Met and you can afford the dress and all of the pomp and everything else, you have zero understanding of what's going on, maybe for the person just down the street in New York who couldn't take the subway to work during a pandemic because it had been flooded. Oh, climate change, right? So this, again, is just, it's almost a movie where you see the movies where the elite moved to a space station or something and have zero concept of what life is really like here. And I think that is what we're talking about with the disparity between taxing the rich as a performance art by a member of Congress who can actually do something, as opposed to, if Andy said tax the rich. Two totally different things. Andy has no power to write a piece of legislation. I mean, she could take a crayon and a napkin and write a bill and submit it, but hasn't. And that's really the point. So I forget who else said it. I think it was Whipple-Dingle. Good morning, Whipple-Dingle. Said, I used to stand so hard for AOC, but now I've kind of learned from it. And that's the point. There are no sacred cows, none. And just because you see somebody on TV does not make them smarter or richer or whatever else. Just because someone gets elected to Congress, and let me tell you the inside scoop here, working for a number of congressional campaigns and talking to other people who do, they're probably the least smart people in the entire campaign. You would rather elect a campaign staffer who's smarter and working on policy than that person that has, a white, bright teeth and perfect hair that we put in front of the camera as your congressperson, right? Like, look at Marjorie Taylor. She's sitting in Congress. Are you telling me that she's smarter than you are? Why would we put people on a pedestal? And that is the entire point here. We do it with people who have money. Isn't that why Trump got elected? It was the perception that he was a successful businessman with all this money. We do this to ourselves, and we need to stop doing it.
Right. And it's equated. A lot of it is equated with, well, they were successful in the business community, so they're going to be good at running the country, right? Which is really a contradiction, because the problem is federal government doesn't run like a business. It can't. It's almost the opposite of a business, right? Businesses are driven by profit. Governments cannot be. Right? To make people whole, to keep your people safe in your country, you have to deficit spend on things that will not create profit, right? That's why we see all the problems with capitalism in our society, right? That eventually all of the money ends up in a few hands and everybody else has nothing, right? It's a slow walk from one side to the other. And just wanted quickly, Kerri, to thank Nick. I believe last name is Carducci for the super chat. Thank you, Nick. GDP/P was constant before 1913. Nationalsecuritycasino.com has chart. Yeah, I think you're referring to when the United States was pegged to the gold standard, which meant basically that how much value your currency had depended on how much gold you had in stores, like physically held in the country, right? So it was certainly a lot different than the floating exchange rate, non-pegged macroeconomics that we see now, right? Where you're not pegged to a standard. And that's the difference, right? That's why all of the things that we're talking about is possible and needs to be, right? Because if you're a proponent for progressive policies and we want to make the systemic changes, we want to have a more just society. If we don't understand the difference, if we don't understand the heterodox versus the neoclassical economics, then we will always have the argument to fight that, well, we can't afford it. We'd love to do that, but sorry, we can't do it because the country's broke. And oh yeah, by the way, we have to bail the banks out every 10 years, right? So it's vital for people, even if you don't understand it, to at least acknowledge that MMT is simply a way that we describe how federal financing works and makes all of the progressive policies possible. And then you negate that argument. How are we going to pay for it? Because we know how we're going to pay for it. We just do. And it doesn't hurt anybody or anything, right? And that's the basics of it.
Absolutely. So there are two comments I want to get to. Mr. Methuselah, as an aside, do you play Vampire at all? Because that's when I see Methuselah, that's what I think of. So just curious. Anyway, so he says Americans have to stop creating a cult of personalities around their politicians. No other Western industrialized democracy does this. And absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. Because they're just people. They're just people. And then Biscuit, where was your comment? Biscuit, okay, Biscuit said, I'm going to paraphrase this. Biscuit said she ran on the platform of causing a ruckus. And that I think is what really got people is, and I've said this before, so 3LD, I'm going to ask you this question too, because you also said we need to elect more progressives. And my comment and rebuttal to that is there are 206 progressive caucus members, yet Joe Manchin can do what they cannot. Why? Why is that? How come he can stop the process as a lone senator where 206 representatives can't get their shit together, right? And my biggest complaint with an AOC or Pramila Jayapal is they platformed exactly right. They platformed on this populist narrative on justice, on all of these things that I think most of us, right, left, center, really believe it. But then when they got there, it didn't happen. And you're right, Gene, it's kind of gaslighting. So the damage to me is when we have somebody who does rise, who is all about that and living it and not about trying to get reelected, how will we know them? How will we recognize them? Because these folks took that rhetoric, they took our message, they co-opted it, subverted it, and now we will never again recognize somebody who is not only committed to it, but living it. We're not going to recognize them. And I think that is the damage that's been done. So Nick also waited. Thank you, Nick. You're being extraordinarily generous, and we thank you for it, because a lot of what we do here is going for Rome's tour for the poor. Hello, not performative, actionable. But Nick says, target margins in plausible landlord use. Okay, hold on here. Target margins in plausible landlord use caps intent to compete with consumers. Banking is not a biz, and it shouldn't be. 1980 was gold, 1913 was land at private banks. Oh, okay, so that's what he's saying. It was actually before 1980 that we went off the gold standard.
It was 71. Nixon unhooked it in 71.
71. Okay, thank you. Okay, but then we had robber barons back in 1913. If you remember, we had the rise of the robber barons now, and we see what's happening with industry and everything else. And we had Sherry Weisson talking about the antitrust stuff that's going on. But I want to call back, Nick, please go to taxtherich.com or go to Patriotic Millionaires, because they talk about this in terms of right now, current history, and they're talking about how the tax rate, no matter what you do as a person in this particular tax environment, they're always going to come out ahead because they have rigged the game in their favor. So one of their policies that I really love, because I have a friend who works at the IRS, and she has complained for years that they have taken the teeth out of the IRS and they have gutted their budget. So there are very few people working there. Like, if you're going to rob a bank and you have control over how much security is in that bank, would you pull the security out, right? So that's what happened with the IRS and all of the donor class pushing their members of Congress to get rid of the oversight at the SEC. Oh, by the way, I want to do the story on Pelosi. Pelosi, yet again, has violated the ethic laws when it comes to insider trading, but whatever. Um, but the same thing is happening, right, with the IRS and not being able to be the police that they are supposed to be. So
yes.
thank you.
Yes, to your point, Gary, I'll refer to Professor William K. Black's book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. It's a very good read.
I love Professor Black. He's hilarious. We need to get him on, Andy. Andy, use your clout. Let's get him on. And he's not in California, so
he's in Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota. So yeah, should be easy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just trying to go through the comments. You guys are phenomenal with your discussions back and forth, and I gotta admit, I always learn a lot from you. So I really appreciate this. But yeah, I read it somewhere, and I'm not gonna credit this properly, but not only the squad being part and parcel to this performative stuff, but we did a story about Gaza and Palestine and genocide, which, oh, by the way, they were bombed again last night by Israel. Did anybody catch that? It's been going on for months now, for weeks. During this, what's supposed to be a ceasefire agreement, they're still being bombed and they're still dealing with COVID and everything else. But no one in the squad is actually doing anything about that, right? And if I've got that wrong, please put it in the chat. If you have some evidence aside from giving a speech or sending a tweet, something that pertains to their job of power and influence, please correct me. I hope that I'm wrong on that. I have not seen anything. I look for it. I go through congress.gov trying to find these pieces of legislation or policies or condemnations or referendums, something, and I haven't seen it. So yeah, please share that along. So Andy, that's pretty much all I have for this morning, and I really appreciate having this economics discussion and pointing people back to Patriotic Millionaires, because it's been huge. Oh, Robin, thank you. Robin says, show your love and support for Fred Hampton leftists by buying them a coffee at Ko-fi. And yes, thank you for posting that, because Jackie will get in my ass if we don't say that. So thank you.
And we're afraid of Jackie.
Really appreciate it. I am terrified of Jackie, and she knows it.
And you should be.
That's exactly right. Okay, so did the squad call out the recent murdering of the Afghan family by Biden? Gene, more context in that. Which Afghan family? Because yeah, that's are we talking in general terms? Because no, that didn't happen. And the picture, this new media says, would it be possible and moral to have a mutual aid to create advertisements for green third-party candidates? Here's what I would suggest. Yeah, I guess you could do it. We had the gentleman from California who was running, Dan, for governor on Monday, if you missed that. But if you're going to do advertisements for your chosen political party, get with your local party. You probably have one at your county level, and start doing advertisements for that. But like, we'll bring on candidates, progressive candidates, and talk to them. And I don't care what party they're with. I care about their policy, because we know that they're not going to get that kind of play on corporate media. Oh, Narissa's coming with a correction from me. She says, I disagree. They are funding. Yes, she says they are funding Israel. Okay, yes, Narissa, you're right. Not only have they not done anything to condemn it, they are literally funding it. And we saw the arms bill. They didn't block it. We said not only is genocide completely okay, here's more weaponry to do it with. So yeah, you're right, Marissa. I stand corrected on that one. So yeah. So one thing I do want to put out here is I would be happy to do the homework. If you have a particular topic that you want to know more about, or something that you think people should know more about, then please let me know. Drop it in the chat, and I will get right on it. In particular, Jean says, Kerri, as we left Afghanistan, Biden bombed a family of 10. The father was an aid worker. Holy shit. No, I didn't know that. No, and for those of you who don't know, I grew up overseas, and I lived in Islamabad, Pakistan for a number of years. Knew many aid workers, and this is USAID workers. My dad worked for State Department, so all of this is very near and dear to me. We were very close with aid workers who were working in Afghanistan at the same time. So a lot of these people would be the second generation, or even nearing retirement. No, Gene, I didn't know that. But, yeah, I'll definitely look into it. So, all right, before we go over any more time, Andy, any last thoughts?
Just there's a comment here from 3LD. Basically, why not start putting pressure on the shit corporate Dems instead of doing everything to diminish the squad's power by bashing them? Manchin and Sinema are the real problems.
No, no. Manchin and Sinema are there by design. So this is somebody who, oh, bless your heart. Okay, so Manchin and Sinema had two very strong progressive challengers in the primary. And you may have missed that because, as I said just a moment ago, progressives don't get the airtime on corporate media. Both of these candidates had very strong, what was it, Deidre Aboud for Kristen Sinema, and then Paula Jean for Joe Manchin. And if you paid any attention at all during the primary, the DCCC, the DNC, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, all came out in favor of your two corporate Republican-like candidates that sit in Congress right now. Right now. So we had been doing this. We had been calling out the corporate Dems. We had been calling out Pelosi, trying to rig the primaries that she does not own, the taxpayer of the states own. We have been calling all of this out. So when they are propping up Manchin and Sinema to do exactly what they are doing today, that is the point, and you have missed it. So thank you so much for tuning in this morning. I hope you get this message that, yeah, you are now up to speed. That when they talk about Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, if you don't believe what I'm saying, go look at their war chest. Because every time they open their mouth to block policy, the DNC drops a ton of cash into their coffers so that they can run for office again. And maybe you missed the program that we did an entire expose on the new PAC that Democrats have opened up to make sure that incumbents are surviving their challenges by progressives during the primary. You've been asleep at the wheel, and I am so glad that you joined us so that now we can catch you up on what's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years. So yeah, Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin are features of the Democratic Party, not bugs. So
yeah, and and I think that's the biggest divide now on the left. I think that we're seeing that there's a crowd on the left that basically says, leave the squad alone. They're doing their best. We have to concentrate on changing the centrist and all of those things. Well, your democracy works on a very fundamental idea of a region of the country choosing someone to represent them in the federal government in Washington. You choose that person, you send them to Washington. They're supposed to be your voice in Washington. If you don't agree with that voice, it not only is your right, it's your job to question that and to hold their feet to the fire and to do that. That's how democracy works. If the squad made these promises while they were running and didn't deliver any of them, you have a right to be angry about that and say why. That's how democracy is supposed to work, right? Manchin and Sinema are the problems. Well, Manchin and Sinema got elected and they represent their regions of the country, right? Hold your own representative accountable. Call your office and say, I'm not happy with your stance on this and this and this. You need to change. If more people did that and put pressure on their own representatives, we would be in a different place right now. Right? It can be that simple. So anyways, we've run over time a bit, Kerri. I didn't know that we were going to, this is going to turn into a macroeconomic debate, but regardless, just a couple of quick announcements before we go. Fred Hampton leftists are at just a hair under 10,000 likes and subs, trying to get the push for 10K. I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300 to go. So if you haven't, please go to our YouTube channel and click like and subscribe. We certainly appreciate it. It helps to get our word out there on a platform that is, not the most favorable to the leftist side of the fence. But we really appreciate your support. As well, I also want to mention that the 3-day General Strike Summit is coming up. It is being hosted by us on the Fred Hampton Leftists. It is going to be the second weekend in November. It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I believe we have scheduled marathon streams for all 3 days. So we are going to be filling with the likes of activists and union leaders. And it's going to be an amazing event. So make sure you put that on your calendar because that's coming up. Anyways, we're over time. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody in the chat for participating in this discussion, lively discussion, a lot of great ideas. We appreciate you, our audience. We appreciate the support and all the super chats. Thank you very much. And enjoy your day. Have a good Wednesday. And we will see all of you, hopefully, back here bright and early on Friday morning. Thanks and take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone. We out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keep it in G. Whoa.